Thank you so
Hi.
much. Hey, how you doing?
Yes. I'm so excited, clearly. Thank you so much, Center for Fiction and Melanie and Lola. Thank you so much for this book. I'm so excited to be chatting with you tonight about In Every Mirror She's Black. And thank you everyone for attending. First of all, before we get into everything, Lola, where are you zooming from?
I am zooming in from Stockholm, Sweden. And I also wanted to say thank you for hosting today, and thank you, Melanie, and everyone at Center for Fiction. It is 1 a.m. here in Stockholm, Sweden. So.
Oh my God. Okay. Well, that that means we're gonna keep the energy going. Oh, well. Also, before we get into it, I want to say that this book was also picked as a GMA Buzz Pick. It was announced last week, right? How does that
Yes.
feel?
Yeah, no, it's incredible. It's we call it our little book that cold. So we're super honored that we got the GMA Buzz Pick for the week, and we're just it's just beginning its journey. So we are just grateful. I am.
Yes. Well, we're so grateful too. Would you like to read a little bit from your book, and yeah, we'll go from there and dive into these really fascinating characters.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just going to read the first page that introduces us to Kemi. And so I think it starts, chapter 1. Kemi. America had decimated Kemi's love life. It had shredded her dignity and tossed its slivers into the air, cackling like a hyena. Relegated to picking up questionable prospects, Kemi was tired of wearing her invincible armor, a 2-ton defense system that screamed to the world she didn't need a man. She couldn't carry that weight anymore. Lately, her dating life read like a dossier of shame. First, there was that one memorable dinner with Deepak. I think I told you I'm a software developer, right? Deepak began to overdose on his own voice 20 minutes in. Kemi simply glared at him. She figured his name dropping his career the 6th time wasn't worth a verbal response. The rest of the evening, Deepak intermittently punctuated his monologues with his love for Black booty. Then there was the silent date with Earl, a white accountant from Ohio, who summoned visions of a serial killer. Earl kept staring into nothingness past her face. Each time he tried glancing away, his hawk eyes floated down her cleavage, then darted back to the intriguing void beyond her. She wasn't sure if he was shy or scheming. So that's the first page.
So good.
Thank you.
That opening really just like pulled me in and also made me think of flashbacks to my own dating experience in New York.
Yes.
So we have 3 different very fascinating characters. We have Kemi, who you just read from, who is a Nigerian-born young woman who emigrated to the States to go to college and then is headhunted by a Swedish company for her marketing abilities so she can help them fix their PR problems, which we've a familiar story. And then we have Luna, who is a Somali refugee who also is working on immigrating to Sweden, but of course her story is very different, right? Because she lost her family beforehand. And then we also have Brittany Ray, who was a model before she ended up falling into a relationship with a man named Yanni. And he kind of sweeps her off of the plane that she was on. She was a flight attendant, and she ends up involved with him. And I won't spoil too much about this story, but as everyone can hear, these characters are so different and so rich and so nuanced. Can you just tell us about how these characters came to be and how the story came to be as well?
No, absolutely. So I am, I'm based in Sweden. I've been living here close to 12 years now. And before that, I used to live in the US for 16 years. I'm an American citizen. And before that, born in Nigeria, lived there till I was 15. So I have experience, kind of as a Black woman, living in very different societies. And beyond that, I also work as a travel writer. I've been to lots of many different countries, getting beneath the nuances of culture. So once I wanted to go back into fiction writing, because I started when I was younger, I used to write fiction, then went into nonfiction. But when I wanted to go back into fiction, I looked closer to my own experiences. I'm not Kemi. I just want to say that I'm not Kemi, but I looked closer because I am a Black woman in Europe, in Northern Europe. I have a large network here. I know lots of different Black women in all ranks of society, and our stories are so different and unique and not heard, right? I mean, I still travel and people ask me if there are Black people in Sweden, right? So
yes.
So I knew that I needed to create this book that highlighted at least 3 voices, and those 3 voices are to tackle career, which is a big thing of contention, because in the Nordics, sometimes if you don't have the right quote unquote last name, you don't even get called for an interview. I wanted to tackle career. I wanted to tackle class, because even though it's a kind of egalitarian society, it's still quite classist. People ask you where you live instead of asking you what you do, so they can kind of quickly socioeconomically place you.
Yes. And I thought that was not the, but I thought that was so interesting, that part where Kemi is talking with everyone, and that I can see that translating here, because constantly when I was reading this book, I was thinking about, of course, my own experiences traveling throughout the world, but also my experiences here compared with that. And like, you kind of see a similar thing in New York in terms of boroughs, but it's like a whole other level, it seems like, in Sweden. And I thought that was so eye-opening.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's one of those things there, and with culture, which kind of represents Muna, is the last few years there has been the Nordics have opened the doors to more refugees and asylum seekers, and there's been culture clashes and integration issues. And so I needed to bring those to light, and especially with Muna's story, because I used to go to an asylum center working on a photography project, and I met many Munas. So I knew that I needed to bring their voices. And there is one more character, Yoni. And one thing I always get, I know, well, one thing I always get is, why can't you just write a book about Black women? Why does this white guy have to insert himself, into it? And so I wanted to provide context. Black women do not move to Sweden without a reason. It's not Italy, it's not Portugal, it's not France, it's not, places where we say maybe the culture lures us. So for us to kind of move to Sweden, it's usually one love. You meet a Swede or you meet somebody from the region, you move. The second big reason is usually either as a refugee or asylum seeker. The third, maybe a job transfer, or you get, and then the fourth, maybe a study abroad program. But those top 2 reasons are usually what brings Black women to the Nordics, Black women that are not born in the Nordics. And so that was why, if I did not put his character in, the story won't be rooted in reality.
Yes, and I'm so glad you say that, because I found Yanni so fascinating. You do such a beautiful job of really showing how he changes through the eyes of each of the women in this book, because they're all tied to him in different ways. I won't say too much, but it's just so realistic, and it really does feel like a portrait of a snapshot of like this one particular man, and then also like how his gaze affects all of these women. You do such a great job of really exploring that tension. But then there's also this really interesting nuance that you have, I think, throughout this book, right, where Yanni is still very sympathetic in ways. I mean, maybe not everyone agrees, but I find, I mean, there's a very important part about Yanni, and his storyline is unlike one that we see oftentimes in books, that's just discuss these kinds of issues and adds another layer. But you afford your Black characters so much, well, they afford so much grace in a way to a lot of the male characters in this book who sometimes don't deserve it, oftentimes don't deserve it. But for one example, early on, when Kemi is leaving her job in the States to go to Sweden, and she's thinking about her Connor, who's her boss, right? And how he kind of has this, like, he's had this thing for her for the whole time, and I was really taken by this quote that I wrote down. When Kemi's leaving, Connor never made it to the fridge in time for his midnight snack. Her leaving was unfinished business for him. His disposition told her this from across the room, and something familiar bubbled up within her along the lines of pity. And that was so fascinating to me. Why did you have those glimpses for readers?
Exactly. No, absolutely. And so one thing is, all three women are very real. They are rooted in kind of real issues that we deal with, that we don't like to talk about. And I afford them space to make mistakes, because societies, the narrative society has crafted for Black women is, you have to be strong, you have to be unflappable, you have to be not vulnerable, you have to show that you don't need anything, need any man, be on your own, strong. And I wanted to kind of twist that on the head to say, you know what, we can break as well. We also need to be taken care of, be tender and gentle, with us as well, right? And so that was kind of why I created all this kind of dynamics within the book. Because, for example, with Kemi, right? She's a strong character, but she's also one that's not a really likable character, and, there are old books written about just one issue she faces, but all the issues she's facing, is still making her unlikable to a lot of people, right? So there's so many kind of nuances with the characters. I mean, even thinking about Brittany, Brittany is tired of serving. She's worked as a flight attendant for many years. She has to smile to rude customers in first class, right? And and there is a scene in the book that, it's a very small scene, but there is a scene where Yoni, she's on the flight, and it's kind of, the lights are dimmed and she's walking down, and then he just grabs her hand and then pulls her towards him, right? And of course she's scared, but then what does she do? She squats down and says, "How can I help you, sir?" Right?
Yeah.
That is what kind of society forces women, and even, Black women, to, okay, hold your feelings in, because if you react, then you're the angry Black woman, right? Hold your feelings in, try to temper the situation. So the book is just filled with a lot of this kind of, threads that say, you know what, Black women are vulnerable, we're human, we're women as well, so.
Yeah, absolutely. And that push-pull between being what we're expected to be versus what we want to be. And that's something that we see through every character moving throughout. And I know it makes for really good discussions like this one. And I know a lot of people are talking about it. Yes. So I have another question for you in terms of discussions. You had mentioned that you wanted this book to be women's fiction rather than literary fiction. Can you touch upon that a little bit? And
yes, no, absolutely.
Yeah, where you're coming from.
Absolutely. So, the way I write in my other kind of nonfiction work has a more literary slant to it, my other books. But when I started writing this, I started with literary fiction. I was trying to go with the most flowery, descriptions and just beautiful prose. And then I stopped because I was reading another book that had a strong message, but the message was getting lost in the writer's prose. And I said, you know what? I need to stop. This book is a lot more urgent. The stories of these women's lives are actually more important than my flowery prose. I want people to remember their lives, see them as people, so that by the time you finish the book, you remember, I can't stop thinking about Mona and Brittany and Kemi, instead of saying, oh, Lola could turn a phrase. So for me, that was a conscious choice. I wanted to make the book very open. It's well written, but just accessible in a way that people immediately just connect with the characters, connect with their stories, see that this is real life, and move that way. So that was why it was a conscious choice to write it this way.
Yeah, Kemi and the cinnamon buns like will forever be linked.
I know. Yes.
By the way, who was your favorite character to write, and who was the hardest one?
Yes.
Do you think?
So people always assume Kemi is me because I'm Nigerian American, you know, I'm a career woman. I moved to Sweden, but she's actually not me. Kemi is what I call me being lazy. So so that is me saying,
that.
you know, but it is true, you know, I'm like, you know what, if I make a Nigerian American, I can quickly root her. I know the culture. I can, you know, I know how parents think. And how can I describe her? Let me just look at my body. Okay, she kind of looks like this. That was quick. But Muna is actually, people don't know this, but Muna is actually the character that's closest to me as a person. I moved to the US when I was 15, and I struggled a lot with isolation and belonging and trying to fit in. And my first job at 15 was as a janitor as well, you know. So Muna's character is super dear to my heart, you know, in that sense. And, you know, being in the Nordics, I made her Somali, again, to root her in reality. If I had put Muna in, if the book was based in Italy, maybe I'd have made her Nigerian, or if she, in the UK. But in the Nordics, it's usually more East Africans, just statistically. And then the most difficult character to write was Brittany, because Brittany as a character and I have very different values. We're not even close, but Brittany is also valid, and her story is valid, and I need to give her space to be who she is, you know. And I think Brittany is the character that a lot of women also struggle with, because they want to like smack her and say, come on, girl, you know, like,
what are you
be
doing?
strong, you know, what are you doing? I'm like, let her be, you know, let her make her mistakes, let her model through life. We're all allowed that, or we should, as Black women, be given that space to model through life, you know, as well. So
I admire that so much. I think that's really difficult to write a character who is so different from one's value, at least for me personally. I think, I mean, but I also think, you know, and you mentioned this earlier, and this leads into my next question, I promise, but sometimes getting inspiration from other places can be really useful and helpful. Who are some literary voices that you've been reading, or cinematic voices that maybe influenced this book, or just influenced like the way you were writing the book and how you're moving throughout that process?
Well, that's a great question. So many amazing writers and influences. I would say the idea for the book actually came when I was on vacation. I was on vacation in Portugal, and I actually had Americana with me, so Chimamanda's book Americana, and I just finished it. And when I just finished it, I was like, of course. Even though Ifemelu is not the, you know, Chimamanda, even though the main lead is not her, you could tell she pulled from really true kind of lived experiences in different spaces, because it felt so relatable as a Nigerian that moved to the, you know, to the US. And so that was what kind of inspired me to look closer, look at your network. I mean, Lola, you've traveled a lot, you've lived, you know, in different places, you know this culture very well. Why don't you look closer for the stories that need to be told? And so that was what kind of inspired, you know, this book.
Nice. And I just want to remind the audience, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom. So I'm kind of like a big craft person. So I am so curious, like, how did you keep everybody straight in terms of like, I mean, who sees who when, like the chapters. I mean, every break felt very purposeful while I was reading. Every end of a chapter, and sometimes, for those who haven't read it yet, sometimes, or I think every time, every character appears in a chapter at least once. I could be wrong, but it flows that way, and it sounds like it could have been really hard. So how did that happen? Did you already know the structure when you first started writing this, or was that something you worked through? Yeah, no, okay.
No, I actually
Really
didn't know the
hard.
structure, but I did know the characters, right? So what I did was,
Yeah.
before I actually started writing the book, I spent 4 to 5 months just crafting the characters and personalities. And if I remember the scene, or I'm like, oh, I remember this, maybe we can tweak it for this, and kind of outlining, so that by the time I actually wrote, I knew the character so well that when I was writing, I'll be like, you know what, this is how Kemi will react in a situation, so let me take her this direction. Or this is what Mona will do, so let me take her that direction. So just knowing the characters, because I spent months just kind of getting into their heads, outlining, was what allowed me to naturally go where they would go, because they had become, to me, people. This is what Brittany will do. This is what Yasmin or Khadija, or what they'll do. So that was kind of how that process. And then in terms of how the book is structured, where something happens at the end, so it makes you want to turn the next page to figure out, that actually comes from, I think, from years of being a travel writer. Because when you're a travel writer, you are given a limited space to create a very impactful story. So you get like 1,200 words in a magazine or a newspaper to write an intriguing travel story. So that means your intro has to be strong, great transitions, and then the end, so it felt like I was doing that for the entire book. Like it was like chunks of, because I didn't know how to write any different, because I had to keep kind of, okay, transition to this, and then transition, and then transition. And because that was years of being just a travel writer, you have to
Disciplined.
Yeah, it's just kind of transitions that way. So that's kind of how the book writing process came about. So
that's really impressive. I I wish I had that kind of like just discipline, because I do feel like, again, the story just flows so well, and yeah, like we would find something out with one character, and then turn page and another character, like, what, how are you gonna do that? Like, that's not fair. What's happening? And then when we come back into that action, it's even more satisfying, even though I'm a little frustrated about it. But
thank you.
And I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit, because you mentioned the ending, and I'm not gonna spoil that either, but it is very intense. I felt a lot of just a lot of visceral reactions. And I can see people really digging into that ending and talking about it. I'm gonna ask you a question that I feel like maybe you get all the time, but did you know while you were, I mean, I guess you did, right? Since you were outlining kind of throughout the process, but did you have a sense when you first started writing or thinking about this idea, like when you were on vacation, that it was going to end this way?
No, not at all. I mean, I didn't know how the book was going to end. I just didn't know, but I did know the characters, and I did know what the way they were thinking and what decisions they will make depending on what's happening in their lives, And when I was writing the book before this one called Logom, I came across a Swedish proverb, and that Swedish proverb is, den djupaste brunnen kan också tömmas. So the deepest well can also be drained. And when I came across that proverb, it arrested me immediately, because Black women are some of the deepest wells in society, if not the deepest wells. The things we have to deal with, the things we have to take, the things we have to endure while still being strong, while not being allowed to complain. It's a lot. And so I wanted to honor that proverb in different ways as well, through the different women's experiences as well. So.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And how did, I mean, so you have many different identities that are all, of course, make up the wonderful author that is you, Lola. How did all of those parts go into this book? So how did your identity as a travel writer, you touched upon it over in terms of structure, but in terms of characters, how did your experiences as a photographer and travel writer influence that? And also your experiences, if you don't mind getting into it a little bit, being in Sweden, because
Yes.
I have no idea what that's like.
Yes.
I can only imagine how difficult it must be, and you do a really, again, amazing job of portraying it in the book. But like, was that like
Yes.
therapeutic or
Yeah.
like
No,
stressful?
absolutely. No, I'll share some some context. So, as a travel writer, you capture a sense of place, in the work you do. And so Stockholm is almost like another character in the book, the way I describe the city and the way where people read the book and they're like, oh, I want to come visit. And you should come visit, Sweden, come visit Stockholm. So I describe it in kind of really wonderful ways because the city is stunning. It's a beautiful city, absolutely. And I've lived here for, 12 years. I've traveled around Sweden a lot. I love Sweden. It's my kind of adopted home. I've written a lot about Sweden for different publications, but I'm also a Black woman in Sweden, and there are things that still need to be addressed. So as beautiful and wonderful as it is, there are some things that still are imperfect. And so the reason I also wanted to write this book was I kept meeting a one-dimensional image of Sweden when I traveled. And I'm like, but this is 2021, 2022. Why do people still have this one-dimensional image of the country? And all these voices are valid as well, and so I needed to create a more multi-dimensional view that's true and valid and rooted in reality. And so again, pulling from personal experiences, from different networks, from just mixing everything up and creating real kind of voices that people can connect and relate to. So that was kind of how everything came together, those aspects of my life inspired the book.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I feel like oftentimes these things are so interconnected, and I mean, do you feel like, I mean, I guess it's the leading question, but do you feel like it would have been a different book if you had written it before you had this other amazing career? Like I don't know. It's just like, I don't know.
No, I think it would
Question
be.
there.
Yeah, so I think this was the book I was meant to write at this stage of my life, right? So if I was in a different context, I would have written a different book that was contextual, right? Based on your experience, based on your lived, your circumstances. So this was just the book that was the right book to write at this time, of my life. And so that's kind of how that came about. And I did want to share, and this is not giving away any spoilers, but in the very first chapter, when Muna and Ahmed, are talking at the center, I spent 2 years, like I said, I used to visit an asylum center here in Sweden. I was just working on a photography project with the asylees, I wasn't really publishing those photos anywhere. It was just more to print it and give it back to them to say, look, your experience doesn't define you. This is who you are, And one of the people I met there, a Kurdish guy, he actually said to me, Lola, I tell you, I love living here. It's beautiful, but you know what? I'd rather just go back home and die fighting for something than die in paradise doing nothing. And so that line inspired that conversation in the book. So these are real people, valid, having different experiences that are also part of Sweden, that also need to be recognized and acknowledged. Because at the end of the day, as human beings, we just want to be seen and heard, right? And saying, what, you matter as well. Your voice matters. You as a person matter too. So.
Thank you for sharing that. How have you been hearing from, well, I'm going to ask about American readers, but
Yes.
like Swedish readers or
Yes.
people who are very familiar with Sweden, both white and not white, like what has that reception been like? Has it
Yes,
been
exactly.
surprising or
No,
gratifying or?
absolutely. So those that have read the book have been really positive. They've just been writing and be like, you know what, thank you, we've needed this book. The publication journey has been
Yes,
rough because
yes,
because
yes.
I mean, right now the book has four, I mean, the book before this, right, which was Logom, is in 18 different languages except Swedish. And that book is about
Mm,
Swedish culture, right? And then this book, um, a lot of the Swedish publishers have been rejecting it. And one of them that was really interested said, you know what, we really, you know, you're a great storyteller and it's great that you have this great insight, but Muna section, can you maybe cut some scenes and tone it down, because we think it might make the Swedish audience uncomfortable. And so I wrote back like, which Swedish audience? You mean the white Swedish audience or the non-white? You know, and so the reception has been more grassroots, right? You know, people have been championing it, but it's you know, the book is still out. You know, it just came out in September, October. We still have time, so you know, we're giving the publishers time to to warm up to it, but it's, you know, it's real life of people. And at some point, if we want to talk about it, if we want to address issues, we need to talk about them. And when you talk about them, you first acknowledge them first. So that's kind of where we are, you know.
Yeah, I mean, and it's like, I mean, it definitely puts things in perspective, right? I mean, I think about all the conversations happening around publishing here, obviously, publishing so white, all of that. And while I was reading, I was really thinking about those conversations again, just like my own experiences, and then transposing them into Sweden. And there's, and she's not a big character, but Tobias's sister, who is the Swedish pop star. I love that. Is she based on a real person, by the way?
Like, well, there are many, you know, there are many. So it's like none of the characters are one person. They're just a mix of everybody's stories, because, you know, people can recognize themselves in every character, you know, so it's not based on one person, you know, but it's based on the idea of different, you know, especially with you know, performers here in the Nordics as well. And so that character, Tina, you know, kind of quit, you know, and people will read it, you know, we're not giving too many spoilers, but you know, you know, she's fighting a different battle now, so
okay, cool, because I was gonna Google her and there's like, no,
but there are many, but there's not, it's not based on one person, or and it's just lots of you know, it's the idea of the person. It's almost like you can create a token of a person, and then fictionalize, and people will still relate because it's a token.
So. Well, the reason I brought her up was just because of her, what she's doing and her kind of activism, and again how isolating it could be or can be there for a person of color, and just in a strange way made me feel a little less like, I mean, I'm still very frustrated about our current situation, but I also think, again, each of these characters, you know, seeing their stories, it just reminded me of the importance of literature like this, of stories that we do not see very often or at all, in my case. So thank you.
Thank you for this. Yeah, no, and it's really important, you know, I mean, I wrote this book with perspective, right? You know, I mean, I am an American citizen as well, even though I'm naturalized. And it means different things to self-actualize as a Black woman in different parts of the world. That's white dominated, you know, and I think the US is ahead in terms of like the West is quite ahead, because, you know, I can see Black women CEOs, but in Europe, even though it's we tend to say, oh, we don't quote unquote see color, and you know, everything is utopia,
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like there's that glass, ceiling of where you can play. Just as long as you play at this level, you're gonna live the perfect quality of life. But the minute you try to like, why do you want to be CEO of IKEA? Like, why do you want to go there? Then, all the worries comes out. So I really needed to share this voice of the contemporary Black woman in Europe as well, and
Yeah.
different voices, because there is also passport privilege, there's also country privilege, and that's why I add kind of the three different women. So
Yeah. There's the shades of the layers of privilege and how deep
yes,
they run. Very
yes.
prominent in this novel. And also in the title. How did you
Mm.
come up with this very striking and very memorable title?
Yeah, absolutely. So the original title was actually called Afro Swede. And Afro Swede,
Oh,
but it
yeah.
wasn't just the word Afro Swede. It was on the Afro, I add the Swedish umlauts and the Swedish characters. And then on the
Mm-hmm.
Swede, I add the African intonations. So I kind of played with the visuals.
Oh, yeah.
But then once we got to the publisher, Source Books Landmark, amazing publisher, is known for testing titles with test
Oh.
audiences. And people
Mm-hmm.
thought,
Mm-hmm.
what's this? Is it a book of poems, a book of chants, incantations? Like, it was confusing. And so we did a lot of brainstorming in-house, and it was actually the Black sensitivity reader. And I think her name is Rachel or Raquel Garrett, one of the
Okay.
Black sensitivity readers in-house, that actually came up with this title during the collective brainstorming session. And then we're all like,
Oh.
yes, that works. It actually
Yeah.
works best for the stories of the women, because
Yeah.
that's what the world sees first before they open their
Yeah.
mouth.
Yeah.
Because the world sees kind of Black women as this kind of monolithic thing. We're not
Mm-hmm.
really individuals, and if Lola makes a mistake, well, you know how it is. Zakiya is probably going to make the same mistake.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
so the title works in that regard, and then on the flip side, it also says you are who you are when you look in the mirror. So you have to love yourself. Nobody else is gonna
Mm.
love you more than you love yourself first.
Yeah.
So there's so many dimensions to that title. I love it. So thank you, Sus Books, for for it.
It's so good. It's so good. And yeah, I don't know what it says about me that I didn't necessarily see that the second interpretation of the beauty of it, but that is really what I saw, especially when Muna is kind of well, I don't want to give away too much,
Yes.
but there is a little bit of them interacting in this novel, but not entirely.
Yes.
Was that a conscious decision, by the way? Was that something that?
Yes. Yeah, no, absolutely. Because again, the point was I wanted to make the women individuals. And if I wanted to make them individuals, I wanted to give them personalities that may clash. That say, you know what, I'm an individual. If we were in the US, we probably wouldn't be friends, Kemi and Brittany, right?
Yeah.
So why do we have to be friends just because we're Black in Sweden? And so
Mm.
it's kind of like somebody saying, coming to, it's like me going to a white woman saying, hey, Jessica, I know Becky from Ohio, and you're also from Ohio. Maybe you should be best friends, like it doesn't make sense. And
Yeah.
and I get that a lot. You're like, oh, you're from Nigeria. You know what? I know this guy. His name is Sunday from Nigeria. I'm like, there's 250 different tribes with over 500 different languages. I don't know everybody, even my extended family, I don't even know everybody. So,
Yeah.
so I wanted to bring that in a nuanced way. And I want to share this, especially with Kemi and Brittany. Kemi is, like I said, it's not a very likable character. She's a very super judgy character. She's just judgmental
Mm-hmm.
because she's always had to kind of work hard and work and work. And Brittany is just a stunning creature. She's a beautiful woman. And so Kemi was already at this kind of our own biases against, because even in the beginning of the book, when she meets Yoni, she says, the world is not ready to listen to beautiful people. They cry their beauty as a
Mm-hmm.
disadvantage. We're not there yet, right? So she says this. And so, of course, when
Mm-hmm.
she meets Brittany, she will come with all that judgment, like, oh,
Right.
you're just using your beauty to get ahead while I'm working, But at
Yeah.
that moment, the readers already knew Brittany at that point
Mm.
that you actually sympathized for Brittany instead of Kemi at that moment. So yeah, so
So
that's
good.
and then the one thing I also wanted to add, because one of the feedback I get is like, oh, I wish all three women had found each other and just had become this like Black Charlie's Angel sisterhood in Sweden. And I'm like, yes, I'm an idealist. That would have been wonderful. But in reality, because I needed to root this book in reality, Brittany and
Yeah.
Mona probably wouldn't have been in like crossing circles because they move in
Yeah.
different circles, right?
Yeah.
So I really wanted to root this. And I think, the closer to reality you write kind of fiction, the more it kind of rubs people. Like people get nervous because it's too real, right? So yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's so true. Muda and Brittany would never cross paths. And it also speaks to Yanni's power, just how everything he touches metaphorically and literally is just, he has this power as this
Yeah.
white male. And again, it's really fascinating to read, everyone. I'm like tiptoeing around. I want to talk to you about specific things.
No, but say it, please do, because I think his character is a symbolic character. There's a reason why I created him that way, because it actually his character is the system. It's it's just the system that with no checks and balances. So
Yes, no checks and balances for sure. For sure. Well, it looks like we have a couple of questions here, so I'm going to go ahead and kick us off with the first one from Carrie Jo Bell. Hello. So Carrie asked, for both Lola and Zakiya, what's your process for writing a synopsis? Oh,
well, that's
feels
a
like a very
tricky one.
yeah. Oh man.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's almost like, I mean, I don't have a process. I mean, this is my first kind of fiction, a debut fiction published. But I would say, the way I wrote it was just start with like the gripping line of what I want people to kind of, hook them, and then maybe a description of the characters, and then what people might learn, at the end, or what the book is about. But one thing I've been noticing though, is some people say that, oh, maybe sometimes synopsis don't do a book justice, or maybe the synopsis is better than the book, or the book is much better than the synopsis. So it's a very difficult, tricky thing, that it's a collab. It's not just you, the author, but also like with the publishing house as well, and writing a synopsis. So I don't know. It's one of those weird things. What about you? How do you write yours?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, because I'm working on my next book, and I'm like thinking about it as a synopsis right now.
Yes.
And that's kind of how I'm like writing a rough outline. I don't know, we'll see. But my first book, The Other Black Girl, really I was a pantser. I was like writing it as I went, and I kind of had a sense of, I knew like the beats, but didn't really know where it was going to go. And so once I finally figured that out, I kind of took out, I mean, I kept all of the parts that grounded the beginning, and now I'm like trying not to spoil my own book, but really I was taking out the parts that whenever I found myself talking to someone about it, especially in those early days before I had an agent, before I knew I was actually going to finish it, I was talking about it to people, and I could tell what things were like exciting them about it when I was going through it and kind of rambling. And so that helped a lot with like pitching and querying. But I agree. I think it also synopses change depending on the audience. I feel like what you see online is going to be very different from like a shelf talker in the store. So that's a really good question.
Really
do you
good.
think Lola, you're gonna like outline again for your next book, do you think, or if you're not already working on it, or how do you do you feel like, not to put you on the spot, but...
No, it's okay, because I actually earlier today I was just on Instagram stories showing like the printed manuscript.
Oh my god, how did I miss that? That's
I know, so that was
amazing.
exciting. So No, but I
Oh,
think with that one, I actually didn't outline. I actually just went
yeah,
straight into it. I just, the
yeah,
first one I was trying to, okay, but this one I just kind of went into it and wrote it. It took the last 2 years just chugging
yeah,
away, so
yeah,
it depends, it just depends on the book, what you're trying to write, and if it's kind of organically flowing at the moment. So
yeah, yeah. That's a great point because the
mm,
characters start to talk to you at some point,
yes,
hopefully.
yes.
Um, awesome. Oh, that's so exciting. Congrats. Okay, our next
Thank you.
question is from Mia Farlane. Mia said, I loved In Every Mirror She's Black. I found it so enjoyable reading the snippets of dialogue in languages other than English. I speak a little Danish, so it was fun for me that Swedish was in this book. Could you talk
Yes,
about your decisions around this inclusion, where you included what? Well, that's a
yes,
really good question. I
yes.
also loved it, even though I don't speak a lick of the language, but it really immersed me in the story. Thank you, Mia, for that
No,
question.
thank you, Mia. Hey, hey. I think with Swedish, what I did was I put it based on the fluency of the character, right? So if
Mm-hmm.
Muna could speak Swedish, so when I put Swedish in, I translate it for you, the reader, because you understand it's where in Muna's head.
Right.
Uh,
Oh, yeah.
Kemi a little bit, they start, and then I start to translate more as they understand. With Brittany, I mean, there's a whole section where it's just Swedish with no
Yes.
translations, because Brittany is the most privileged, so she didn't really she wasn't forced to learn the language, and
Mm-hmm.
that is also what I call language privilege, where as an immigrant, the lower you're on the socioeconomic rank, the quicker and the double standards that are pressed on you to learn the language quicker and integrate quickly, and then the higher you go. And so that is
Mm-hmm.
kind of how I included the Swedish, and I think I sprinkled with other languages as well. But there's a big section that's of dialogue between Johan's parents and Brittany and Yoni that isn't translated, and I hope people actually cut and paste it into Google Translate, because there's a whole lot of drama going on there. So yeah.
Yes. Yes. I'm so glad you mentioned that because I had my book and I was like, what? Oh shoot.
Exactly. Yes. So
Heart was beating.
yeah.
Um, cool. Right. So our next question is from Melinda Roscoe. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Melinda asked, for Lola and Zakiya, both of your novels are similar in some ways. Can you do a comparison and contrast between the characters in your books?
That's a
Ooh,
good one.
that's
That's a great question.
fun.
That's a great question. I
That's
think,
really fun.
yes.
Huh.
I mean, I could start. I think,
Yeah.
with Nella and Kemi, in terms of being in the work environment where you are the only one, and then you're
Yeah.
also like a token, and then
Mm-hmm.
you're not even listened to, right? So it's kind of that's what happened with Kemi's character. She actually started a really high position, and then
Yeah.
was just kind of brought in as a figurehead to say, "Are you diverse? Yes, push her forward. Are you diverse? Yes."
Mm-hmm.
But then when it came to real valuing our opinion, it wasn't you know done in the way that she
Yeah.
deserved for our position and experience level. So that
Yeah.
idea of being a token or being the only one, absolutely. So what about you?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was also gonna say Kemi because I mean, for one, I felt like I could relate to Kemi a lot. Personally, there's this quote I wrote down just when Kemi's thinking about her appearance and was she ever going to be enough without accentuating herself?
Yes, yes.
Oh,
I know.
Lola, like
Yeah, yeah.
I just like have been staring at that quote every now and then for the last few days and weeks really, and
Mm,
it's so real. And I think also what I was really taken by was this the scenes where Kemi is around other Black people, especially the one when she's taking the taxi to the airport. I think she's going
yes,
to Sweden, and the
yes,
driver, I believe, is also Nigerian
yes.
or
Is
no, he's
it Ghanaian? I
Caribbean.
think it was Ghanaian
Okay,
guy.
Ghanaian.
Yes.
Sorry, sort of mixed that up. But and he's like kind of like he thinks she's standoffish. Like, I won't again give away the scene,
Yes.
but that kind of like feeling like you have to be everything at work, but then also have to be everything around all the other
Yes.
Black people that you're
Yeah.
around.
To
And if you're
prove your
not,
blackness. To prove your
yeah,
blackness, essentially. Yeah.
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 Sometimes you just want to sit in a taxi and not talk to anybody.
Exactly.
Can relate.
Exactly. You know,
So,
exactly. So yeah.
but also, I think now, I hadn't really thought about this before, but Hazel and Brittany, I think, because when you were talking about like the ethics and just kind of whether or not you agree with their choices, I think that
Yes.
is, Hazel was someone that was very hard for me to write, but also very easy in some ways, because I do feel like that is she is kind of a real person. I hope she's not a real
Yes.
person, but
Yes.
in Hazel's case, but
Yes.
yeah, I think that was really, and also just as someone to be consumed,
Yes.
and accentuating someone. And so yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a really fun character or
Yeah. Yes.
question. Sorry.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, I think, let's see. I have one more question for you
Okay.
as kind
Yes.
of just a wrap up. Um, because this book is, it's so many different things. Um, it's funny, it's charming, it's really really eye opening. It's about isolation as well, though, and I'm just curious, like, what would you say to another Black person who is maybe in a situation, maybe not necessarily in Sweden, but
Yeah.
they're the only one, or they just feel really alone?
Mm.
What are some advice? What's some advice you would give them, or what are some things you would say to them?
No, absolutely. I would say number one, the importance of community, because
Yeah.
I think when you move abroad or when you move to a new place, if you don't find a community, and it's not about just hanging with fellow expats or hanging with fellow Black women, but finding people that can hold space for you when you are dealing or trying to integrate or trying to process your feelings is super important.
Mm-hmm.
And this context of community extends. I mean, when I lived in the US, when I moved to Ohio, I used to live in Maryland. When I moved to Ohio, I didn't know anybody. For me, it was new. I was dating Ohio, but I found a rugby community, right? And so that was that community that kept me sane for 7 years while I was in that place, right? So community can really, when you're feeling down, they kind of infuse you with the energy that you're not alone. They're actually people that enjoy the same things you do, that are going through the same experiences. And so community is super important when you're moving somewhere. It could be based on your skills, based on your interest, based on ethnicity, but at least make sure you're not going in and then saying, you know what, I'm going to do this alone. Because the Nordics, as much as I love this place, it's not the warmest of cultures where people just come talk to you. It's not like Southern Europe where people are just like, hey, bonjour, la la la, no, people just talk with the eyes. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And, maybe say I, but it's not. So you have to start first of all, understand the cultural nuances and then find your community. So.
Very wise words. Very wise words. Holding space, people who hold space for you, and find your community. Thank you
Yes.
so much,
Thank
Lola.
you.
This has been so much fun talking to you. I know Center for
Likewise.
Fiction is going to say this, but buy this book. Talk about
Yes.
this book. It's such a pleasure and such a beautiful, necessary read. So thank you,
Thank you.
Lola.
Thank you so much, Zakiya. Thank you. Honored. Thank you.
Thank you both. That was a great conversation. Lola, congratulations again. If you haven't read this book yet and you listen to that and you aren't dying to read it immediately,
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you all again soon, I hope. Thanks.
All right. Thank you all so much. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye.